Now it's time for news and comment. First, the news.
Good evening and welcome to Christianity Newsflash, where we scrutinize the scriptures and compare our findings with the beliefs and practices of traditional Christianity, all for the purpose of separating biblical fact from Christian fantasy. Now, we must warn you, this program is not for the faint of heart. The results of our investigations, well, they're really quite shocking. As hard as the things presented here may be to hear, and as difficult as they may be to accept, Christianity Newsflash is committed to bringing you the hot, off-the-press truth of Scripture. This just in. Christians today are not born again. Let me read that again. I'm not sure if that's a typo. Christians today are not born again. You see, according to the Hebrew Scriptures, that is what we commonly refer to as the Bible, the term born again was specific to and applicable to those in the first century. You see, there were Jews, members of God's Old Covenant people within the Mosaic Covenant, and there were scattered Israelites throughout the nations, the diaspora, who were cut off from the covenant, the 10 northern tribes of Israel. And there were other Gentiles out there who had never had any connection with the Mosaic Covenant. But throughout the New Testament, there is a contrast of covenants. You have the first covenant associated with the first creation and connected to the covenant of Moses, in contrast to the new covenant associated with the new creation and the covenant of Messiah. You see, to be born again for the first century Jew was to detach oneself from the first covenant and the first creation in order to enter the new covenant and the new creation of Messiah. The new birth was a change of status. Those who had been born under the law had to die to the law in order to be born anew, born again, but this time of the Spirit. The elect, those of faith, were being called out of that first covenant of flesh and into the covenant of spirit during the last days of that first covenant, which was the last days of Israel. Here's the truth of it. This was only possible during that New Testament time period. For example, nobody today is being brought out of the Mosaic covenant because there is no longer a Mosaic covenant to be brought out of. In fact, nobody today is being brought out of Adam because Jesus was the last Adam. The offer of being born again was an exclusive offer to those in the first century. You see, there was a status change taking place in the New Testament, and they were taking part in that change. What we read in our New Testament is a period of transformation, not merely for individuals, but for a group, God's people. Jews within God's Old Covenant people, descendants of Israelites throughout the nations, and all others in Adam, were being called to enter Messiah through a new birth. This is the story of the New Testament. The offer of a new birth was exclusive to a particular people at a particular time, the last days. Christians today are not born again.
And now, the comment.
All right, look, I know this is probably really unsettling for many of you, and I get that. But if we claim to be Bible-believing Christians, shouldn't our first concern and priority be to honestly seek and understand what the Bible said and what it meant to the original audiences? I mean, regardless of what that might mean for us today. And shouldn't we first and foremost try to seek the meaning of passages before anything else and then deal with the application for us? Okay? Look, just because something in the Bible doesn't mean what we thought it meant that doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing, right? And it doesn't necessarily make it irrelevant to us today. Now, I'm sure there's quite a few of you right now who are thinking, this guy's off his rocker. Of course Christians are born again today. And maybe right now you're thinking of a couple verses in your head that you are certain prove me wrong. Well, here's what I'm going to do. If you would like me to address this in more detail, I would love to demonstrate with Scripture exactly how the term born again only applied to Christians in the New Testament. And I can show you with plenty of scriptures, and I can contextually explain those scriptures to you in detail to demonstrate my point. But I am not going to do all the work for you. You got to meet me in the middle here. You need to do your part. If you want me to do this, if you want me to further explain, you first. With Scripture, explain to me how this is wrong. And you can do that one of two ways. Number one, all you have to do is respond to me via Facebook or YouTube. Simply message me. Feel free to tell me specifically in the Bible where it teaches that being born again applies to us today and how it's intended for us today. And please, don't just quote Scripture, explain them. Exegete them, expound on them to demonstrate your point and explain how those verses you cite support your claim. Now, perhaps you're not as confident in your scriptural knowledge as you'd like to be, but you're still quite certain that I'm wrong. Okay then, here's what you do. Number two, I would encourage you to ask somebody who might know and see what they have to say about it. And who better to ask than the ones who are paid to have all the answers? Your pastor. That's right. Go ask your pastor. Because we know that pastors have all the answers, right? Wink, wink. So go on. Ask your pastor. Ask him, where in the Bible does it explain that being born again is something that we experience today? And please have him expound on the verses that he gives. Then simply message me with his answer, or have him message me directly and I'll deal with that. So, if I can get at least one person who responds in kind, I promise that I will then reply with a full explanation, a full lesson on a future segment on my series, Ask Your Pastor. So do your part and I will do mine. That is it for now. We will see you next Newsflash.
This has been News and Comment.